There we go. Nelson?
Nelson?
We're good? Go ahead.
Hey guys, Nelson Virgil, and we're here very excited. We have a special guest today, Jerry Branham. He's going to speak about the truth and lies about fat loss supplements. Jerry, who doesn't know Jerry? He's been writing for 57 years I guess you've written in every single fitness muscle magazine. There's not one that you probably haven't written in. He's become, we were talking about it before, he's actually like an icon. People are starting careers as dietitians, nutritionists, sports medicine people because of, after reading his work. I've been reading his work for years. I've been doing this work for 20 years myself, and since Jerry, since I was a little kid, I started reading. No, you're probably as old as I am. So Jerry is an expert. In my opinion, I met Jerry a month ago in LA. He's a walking human encyclopedia. That's how I can describe it. This man can actually remember data from different studies. He reads every single study out there, goes to conferences, talks to researchers. So he is not only a lay person, but he's actually, I consider you, Jerry, a researcher yourself. I was talking to Jay like 6 months ago while he was writing his book, and he asked me, who do you trust out there? I want to list resources for people where do people read information to learn? Who do you trust? And I only had one name. It was Jerry Branham, because I subscribed to his newsletter. I'm going to talk about his newsletter, appliedmetabolics.com, where he writes basically 60 to 100 pages a month of information after digesting studies. So, Jay, you want to take over and say a few things?
Yeah, so first off, everybody, I'm kind of like a fanboy of Jerry's. I'm sure most of the people that are watching today who have any background in fitness or who've read the muscle magazines, know who Jerry is. I mean, again, an illustrious writer. He's written for Muscle and Fitness, Ironman. I mean, obviously I think of Jerry with Ironman because I'm kind of involved with Ironman myself now. But Jerry is just, I mean, honestly, it's like Nelson said, he literally is like a living, breathing icon, a legend. Okay, so I mean, for us to have him here today to discuss this kind of stuff is insane. And like I said, we're humbled and honored to have him here. So let's just kind of go to Jerry. Jerry, just tell us a little bit about your background. How did all this start? How did you get interested in bodybuilding and fitness?
Okay. Well, what happened was I actually started out. My first sport was swimming. I used to go to this little kind of community place that had an Olympic-sized pool. Actually, it started much earlier than that. When I was about 4 years old, upstate New York, my grandfather had a house. There was a pool in front of his house, and my mother, for reasons I still don't understand, took me and threw me into the pool at 4 years old. So it was either swim or So I suddenly turned into a miniature Johnny Weissmuller. I started dog paddling around the pool, and I don't know why. Maybe it's because I'm a Pisces, the fish sign, but I kind of was drawn to swimming. And right after that, at a very young age, I went into swimming, and I competed in kind of like these, I guess you'd call them pee-wee swimming meets and stuff like that. They had something called the Amateur Athletic Union back then. I remember when I got life-saving credentials when I was 12 years old, where I could work as, believe it or not, a lifeguard at 12, that kind of stuff. And anyway, to speed it up, I used to practice my swimming at an Olympic-sized pool at this community center, right? And on the way to the pool, you had to pass a little kind of weight workout. Remember, this would be around 1962, so a long time ago, And as I was walking on the way to the pool one day, I saw a bunch of people. It was a small hallway, and there was a bunch of people crowding in there. And they suddenly parted like the Red Sea. I mean, they parted, and then I could see what was going on. This guy walked towards me, and I remember he had a towel around his neck and wearing posing trunks. and this was my first sight of a real-life bodybuilder, right? And it turns out that his name was Jerry Winnick. And he was actually a professional bodybuilder who happened to train there every so often. Wow. He wound up getting second to Larry Scott, who was the first Mr. Olympia. He placed second to Larry Scott. I believe it was either that year or the year after in the IFBB Miss Universe. Anyway, I started talking to this guy, and the thing that got me, though, it was the impression of him walking down the hallway, the way people looked at him, they were in absolute awe. It was as if an alien spaceship has landed. The best way I could describe it. And I turned to somebody and I said, "Who is that guy?" And I'll never, even after all this time, I still remember the exact words. The person said to me, "That's Jerry Winnick. He's an animal." That's the way he said it. He's an animal, right? And I was in awe. So anyway, I started talking to Jerry Winnick. I said, "How did you get like this?" He says, "I lifted weights." And we talked outside the community center. He was smoking a cigarette, I remember. I mean, this is 1962. Remember, cigarettes weren't considered that dangerous. He was smoking, chain smoking as he's talking to me. And anyway, so he says, "You have to lift weights." So to make a long story short, again, I started going to that little weight room. It was only open 3 times a week. I built up a foundation. Now, the thing I have to tell you about myself, which kind of ties in with what we're all going to be talking about here, is even at that young age, I never took things at face value. I actually researched it. There wasn't a lot of things to check. In other words, there wasn't a lot of references about weight training in those days. But I kind of looked at the few that I could find. They were kind of, I can't remember. One of them was written by a doctor, I remember. It was like a little guide to weight training for rehab and all that. I looked at the exercises. And then I started looking at the bodybuilding magazines. The first one I bought was Iron Man magazine. Still remember, had the cover was a guy named Chuck Pranke standing next to a bicycle. Amazing my memory that I remember this after over like 50 years, you know. But I started looking at the routines in the magazine, and I figured out how to work out. And the good part is, unlike a lot of kids and other people, I worked my whole body from day one, you know, legs, upper body. And I started making, at that time I was like 12 and a half years old. And even though I didn't have a lot of testosterone, as you guys know, you don't get a lot of testosterone at that age, I still started making gains. I mean, I trimmed down. My legs got incredibly strong. Well, then you know, again, speeding it up, I wanted to train more often. The gym was only open 3 times a week. I then went to a Mid-City gym in New York in 1964. I trained there for 1 year. I met some top bodybuilders there. Like Harold Poole was a top guy. Freddie Ortez, all the top bodybuilders of the era. I met at this gym in Manhattan. I used to take the train after school. Then I moved back to Brooklyn, R&J Health Studio. That's where I met Lou Ferrigno, who walked into the gym one day, 17 years old, skinny as a rail, with these thick glasses, you know, that people wear, they used to wear when they had the cataracts. You know, he was with his father, and he used to ask me questions, how to get into bodybuilding, which I told him what to do, you know, and this and that. And, you know, that's how I basically, I actually, the funny thing is, and I mentioned this in my newsletter, this is really weird. I never got into bodybuilding to have muscles or to compete in bodybuilding shows. I got into bodybuilding because I reasoned, imagine, this is 12 years old, I reasoned that keeping healthy and being fit would make you live longer. And this is 12 years old. I'm getting these. This is the thoughts I should have now at my age. I was 12 years old, right? You know what I mean? So I got in. So you could say I got into weight training for health. You know, and I've come full circle because now the only reason I'm into weight training is health. But I did compete in some bodybuilding contests for a year in the 60s. I won a couple of titles. I came out here. I won a couple minor titles. It came to the point where I had to make a decision. The last contest I competed in, I got third. It was called the Mr. Western America. One of the main promoters I remember was, let's see, I can't remember his name. I don't know what happened to him. Some guy named Arnold Schwarzenegger was. And by the way, because of Arnold's promotion, they had, you won't believe this, guys, they had lines like 9 blocks up the street. It was sold out to get into this contest, which is held at the Embassy Auditorium in downtown LA. Anyway, it turns out me and one other guy were the only, you won't believe it, the only guys in the entire contest that were not on steroids, were me and a blonde guy, I remember. And I had to make the decision. I said to myself, now, should I, you know, take steroids and continue to compete? Is it worth it? And, you know, I had this fear about losing my hair, which is, again, kind of ironic with guys walking around today with shaved heads and stuff like that, you know. And both my grandfathers were completely bald by the time they were 30, and I had bad genetics. It scared the hell out of me of being bald by 35. So I made the decision. I said, you know, how much money is in there in bodybuilding? Could I really be like a Mr. America and all this stuff? And I kind of like, I might have made it. Who knows? I don't know. But my top body weight when I competed was 210 pounds, completely drug-free. I took stuff like liver tablets, kelp tablets. I mean, I never touched a steroid, and I kind of like stopped competing. Let's see, the last contest was about, 25, 30 years ago. And ever since then, I switched over to training for health, which is the way it is now. And I never did stop training. And strangely enough, Nelson and Jay, the strange thing is I still train. If you see me in the gym, people wonder because I still look like I'm training for a contest. I don't screw around. I don't talk on cell phones. I train hard. I train intense. I train very fast. And this is like built into me. This is all I know. And it's like a muscle fiber. They say a muscle fiber can only contract at 100% or nothing. And that's the way I am. When I'm in the gym, it's 100% effort or I walk out.
So Jerry, let's get to the meat of it because we only have basically an hour or so. We may go over an hour. What we'll do. This is a hot topic. This is a very abused topic. This is a topic that has made a lot of people rich without basically using empty claims. You've seen, online there are all kinds of claims, as we know, and we like it to keep it that way. The FDA does not regulate the supplement industry, and although claims are supposed to be not only expressed with an asterisk saying the FDA has not reviewed these claims, people, companies freely make claims. So you've done, and by the way, I read your review on the last month, I think, on your Applied Metabolics, and appliedmetabolics.com. That's your newsletter. It's a subscription newsletter. It's very cheap, by the way, guys. It's only $10 a month, and you get basically a textbook. It really is a textbook a month. Yeah. Jay was asking me what I read. That's the only thing I read. I'm old school. I print it out and take it before going to bed, and I read one article a day because you write long articles with a lot of references, which is great because I'm a science guy too. But anyways, is a very abused field with a lot of misconceptions. I tend not to believe anything out there. The CLA stuff, the green tea that Dr. Ross was pushing, obviously we know what happened there. So tell us in your review, what is the most hyped up fat loss supplements out there in your belief? We can move on later on to the actual ones that you think work the best and with the best research that backs them up.
Okay, if you're talking about strictly the most hyped up ones, you'd have to look at a lot of this so-called hype derives from, you guys might be familiar with this guy, Dr. Oz. Every time Dr. Oz talks about a fat loss supplement on his program, the sales, they skyrocket through the roof or whatever he talks about. Now, some of the substances he talked about hype. Now, he talked about one called raspberry ketones, right? Now, raspberry ketones, there's no relationship to the ketones that are produced in low-carb diets. But the thing is, I actually wrote about raspberry ketones, you guys won't believe this, about 18 years ago, way before Dr. Oz ever heard about it. I came across a preliminary animal study which showed that taking raspberry ketones seemed to increase fat oxidation in the animals. Now here's the strange part. This old animal study is the only existing study to prove the efficacy of raspberry ketones. There's no human studies at all. So that's one that's hyped. Another one that's frequently hyped, of course, also by Dr. Oz, is called green coffee extract. Green coffee extract. Now, the green coffee extract, the active ingredient is a substance called chlorogenic acid, right? Now, chlorogenic acid is actually pretty good stuff, and it's actually probably the key factor in coffee that's responsible for the fact that studies show that drinking about 3 cups of coffee a day has a 60% preventative effect on the onset of type 2 diabetes. It's all because of probably chlorogenic acid. What does it do? It inhibits an enzyme that's involved in glucose uptake. Now, because of that, they've suddenly decided to turn it into a fat burner. The problem is there's no research behind it again. And now this is I can go on and on and on, like Nelson, you read my article about fat burners and applied metabolics. The truth of the matter is, there's a lot of exotic ingredients. The supplement companies are always trying to search for various herbs, these esoteric herbs, and very few people wind up looking at the research. I'm one of the people that do, and here's what I find. Almost in every case, these are based on initial animal studies. There's no human data to show that any of this stuff is efficacious in human beings, right? And the problem with this is that a lot of the substances that work in animals don't translate. Animals do not necessarily burn fat in the same manner as humans. They don't utilize carbohydrates. I'm talking about rodents and mice.
Rats, yeah.
So sometimes it does kind of like translate into human usage, but sometimes it doesn't. So when you're taking these supplements based entirely on animal research, you're basically, it's a crapshoot. You're taking a chance. It may do nothing. In most cases, it probably will do nothing. And then you have something like, I think you mentioned it just now, another hype supplement, which is conjugated linoleic acid, CLA, right? This is an interesting substance because it has tremendous health effects in rodents, right? Now, the amount of CLA that they give to rodents is relatively huge. And what happens is you give CLA to a rodent, it will actually reduce the body fat level of the rodent by 60%, 60%. Now, this is a perfect example of what I was saying earlier. What happens when you give CLA to human? The studies are mixed. There's a couple of studies that show beneficial effects. Most of the studies show very little or no effect. And one or two of the studies actually showed that CLA increases insulin resistance, which is not a good thing to have. That's prediabetes. So the CLA is a perfect example of a supplement that works very, very well in animals, not so well in humans.
And moving on to, what do you think are the most promising supplements being researched? And who is doing this research, by the way? Besides companies, what I can see is supplement companies don't want to spend the money on research because it takes money, and they want to make money right away. Research schools, I see very few of them. I guess you probably know a few of the researchers out there. We also tend to believe that we can take a pill in this world and not have to exercise and go through a proper diet to lose fat. So we want a quickie too, and we're in a quick fix society here. Right. So people keep asking me that question. Besides, obviously, we're talking about over-the-counter supplements. We're not talking about prescription medications. We're not talking about testosterone, growth hormone, thyroid medications, which we know there are some fat-burning properties for those hormones. What do you think? What are you reading now that makes you think, hey, maybe there's something here, maybe there's some good human data beyond the mice data that we usually see?
Okay, first of all, what you just said is correct. Studies that are being done on, like I say, some of these esoteric herbal supplements are most of them are independent studies. They're not trying to sell anything, and so a lot of the results are mixed because of the fact that there's a couple of companies though that that do actually sponsor studies, and it is very expensive to sponsor a study. But you will see, and I've had a policy when I wrote for Ironman and the bodybuilding magazines. I very rarely wrote about company-sponsored studies, because of the simple fact is, it's like that old cliche, they got a dog in the fight. In other words, right. I never trusted these studies because I knew that these guys paid big bucks to have these studies, and I knew how studies could be manipulated to come out and show a certain effect. And that's what the case usually was. The company-sponsored studies, in almost every case, showed that their particular product burned a lot of fat, built a lot of muscle, or whatever. But if you really look carefully at the studies, you can see how easy it is to manipulate. For example, they'll compare carbohydrates to protein, something that doesn't really match. And of course, their supplement always comes out superior. So I never kind of like wanted to use those particular studies. Now, as far as fat burners that work and what is promising, well, let me put it this way. There was an independent study. It was published in 2012, and it was done by a nutrition professor. Her name was Melinda Minor. But yeah, it sounds like it's not horse manure. No worry. Anyway, she's a full professor, and she surveyed you won't believe this, she surveyed every available commercial fat-burning supplement. And she painstakingly looked at all the research behind all of these supplements. And remember, she has nothing to do with, she's like me, she's not associated with any supplement companies. So it was a very independent, what they call, it's a, when they look at a bunch of studies, I can't even remember the name.
Meta-analysis.
Meta-analysis. It was a meta-analysis. And what she found was the only things that she found had any research basis. Now remember, this is all the fat burners on the market. The only ones that had any research were green tea, right? The other was fiber, and the third one was low-fat dairy products. That's it. All the others had no real solid research to show any any influence on body composition or fat oxidation. So now green tea actually does work, right? Green tea actually does work. It works, you know, I can go into how it works if you want, very briefly, but
Yeah, go ahead, because it's probably one of the few things that people have access to, and a cup of green tea is not going to make you lose fat, though.
No, it's not going to make you lose fat. And I should add, let me preface these remarks by pointing out that any fat burner, you know, that you buy, even the ones that might actually have an effect, the effect is very minor, very minor. You know, the fat burner market is a huge market because it not only affects people involved in bodybuilding, but people on the street. You'll notice that fat burner ads often appear in magazines that have nothing to do with bodybuilding, because let's face it, there's a lot of people, women, men, that want to lose body fat that they're not interested in building muscle. They just want to lose body fat. So it's a huge market, see? So anyway, the thing is that the effect, if any, is very minor. We're talking, let's say if you lose 4 pounds on a diet alone, if you take the fat burner, you might lose 6 pounds. That's the extent of it. In other words, maybe 2 extra pounds. You know, in the course of a year, it'll add up, but it's still very minor. The key to fat loss, I want to make it very clear right from the start. The true keys to fat loss are exercise and diet, not necessarily in that order. I put it diet, exercise.
People don't want to hear that, Jerry.
Right. I mean, the truth is, you know, just to go back to what Jerry was just saying, is that the reason that those things are sold in magazines and everywhere nowadays is because people are transfixed on exercise in a bottle, fat loss in a bottle, the quick fix, you know, instant gratification society we live in. And so people want that stuff. But Jerry's exactly right. And just, Jerry, I'll let you finish. But, I mean, it really does come down, you know, like they say when people talk about abs, you know, abs are made in the kitchen. It does come down to the diet.
True.
Jerry.
Absolutely. Now, just tangentially, real fast, just to underscore what Jay just said about looking for easy ways out, the most extreme easy way out that I know of at this point, you guys might have heard of this stuff called dinitrophenol, DNP.
Yeah, DNP, of course.
Now, DNP started out, it takes a long time. I'm going to write about it in my newsletter. It's kind of a big subject, but briefly, let me put it to you this way. It's a chemical. It was originally used in the making of dynamite, this and that. What it does is it increases a process called, it inhibits a process called oxidative phosphorylation, which results in the production of energy in the cell, ATP. Doing so, it causes your body to kind of tap into body fat, right? Now, it started, a lot of pro bodybuilders use it. I don't want to mention any names because this stuff really does cause a massive loss of body fat. You can lose a half a pound of fat per day sitting on your behind doing nothing. The problem is that the therapeutic dose and the fatal dose is very small. And this is what a lot of people don't know. I think it's important to say this. What a lot of people don't know, and this has been written up in a couple of newspapers, DNP has been available on the internet. They sell it on the internet as a fat loss pill. People interested who don't know anything about bodybuilding, know nothing about stuff. They've been buying this stuff, and there's been a couple of deaths. A young girl in Britain died. You can check it out on the internet. Do a search. You'll see a couple of young men, young women who don't really work out. All they wanted to lose is they wanted to lose fat. They used the stuff. They died, and they followed. Here's the key: they followed the directions exactly as the dose. So now you say to me, you say, wait a minute. If they didn't overdose, why did they die? I'll tell you why they died, and this is what they're not telling people. Some people have this metabolic quirk where the DNP accumulates in their body, right? So in other words, whether it's a lack of an enzyme or a certain gene, that I don't know. I do know that it can, not everybody, it can accumulate in certain people to the point by about the third day, they now have a toxic level of DNP and they fry themselves inside, they die. Once you go into the death, let's say the death march of DNP, there's very little medicine can do for you. You're dead. You're basically dead in the water. All they can do is try and cool you off and, you know, lower your heart rate, this and that. That's all they can do. So
Jimmy, real quick, I know people that have used DNP. I've never touched it myself. I'm not stupid. I'm a science guy like you. But you literally run a low-grade fever.
Exactly.
You're literally walking around with 103, 102 degree temperature, so you feel like you're sick.
Yeah.
And you have no energy. You're right. I mean, basically, essentially, your body is uncoupling, and so you're running at this elevated temperature, so you literally feel like death. I mean, who the F wants to do that for fat loss?
Well, think about this, Jay. If you take thyroid, we all know that thyroid hormone, it controls the metabolic rate in the body, the resting metabolic rate based on thyroid. We know that's an established fact. If you take thyroid drugs, you can boost your metabolic rate about 10% above normal, right?
Exactly.
Now, if you take DNP, it goes to 50% above, 50% above normal. There's your fever. A top Mr. Olympia competitor, I won't mention his name, he called me a couple of years ago. He heard that the current Mr. Olympia, who he was competing against, used DNP as his secret weapon. He used it 2 weeks before a show. He got rock hard and ripped and shape. This guy was a multiple Mr. Olympia. My friend, who's one of the greatest bodybuilders in history, by the way, he called me up. He says, Jerry, I want to use DNP. Tell me the dosage. Tell me how to use it. I'm going to have this guy. And the guy who actually was going to encapsulate it for him was what's the name of that guy with the Balco scandal? Remember the guy from the Balco?
Victor Conti.
Victor Conti. Victor Conti got on the phone with me and was asking me questions about DNP. So I warned my friend. I said, listen, you're not going to feel very good on this stuff. Now, the Olympia is 8 weeks away. I suggest you try it now, see how you react to it. Don't take it too close to the contest like that other guy. It could screw you up where you won't even be able to compete.
Wow.
So he called me back, to make a long story long, he called me back 2 days later. I said, what happened? He says, Jerry, I felt like I had the worst flu in the world.
Right.
I had headaches like you couldn't believe. I felt so weak I couldn't even train. So I'm done with this stuff. Let the other guy use it. I'm finished. So that kind of underscores what you were saying, Jay, about DNP. I mean, I'm not going to lie to you. It does work.
Right.
And a lot of people, and I'm not going to also lie and tell you that a lot of people haven't used it and not died. And I'm not. But the thing is, you don't know if you're the person that has this genetic problem that's going to kill you. So personally, that's enough for me. I don't want to die. Yeah. I'd rather like live on 0 carbs for 40 years than touch DNP.
Right. I agree with you 100%.
Hey, Jerry, you were mentioning. Sorry, Jerry, you were mentioning that these big names call you.
Yeah.
Do you do consulting or coaching online, or can a regular Joe with that is willing to pay a fee, or is that something you no longer do, or you only do it for athletes? Or
No, I do it for anyone. I had on my Applied Metabolics website. There's if you go to www.appliedmetabolics website www.appliedmetabolics.com/consultations. There's a page. There's a consult page where somebody could, they talk to me first. Sure. I kind of like we make up a number. The charge depends on what they want. In other words, if they only want a couple of questions, I'm not going to charge them a lot of money. If they want to talk to me, a couple of people wanted to do Skype sessions with me for an hour. That's a little bit more money because it goes into a lot of detail. So, I'm available for that. I don't do them very often, to be honest with you. But if somebody wants to do it, I will do it. But like I say, the more time it takes for me to do this, the more I have to charge. And
your time is valuable. I hear that physicians call you too, and some reachers to pick your brain. So.
I do get that also. If they want to.
Yes. So guys, everybody who's watching this show today, and obviously readers of my blog and Nelson's site, if you're not already subscribed to Jerry's newsletter, it's like Nelson said. I mean, honestly, for the information the guy gives away, it's like $10 a month. I mean, it is gold. Like, I have the latest one. I'm reading the latest one, and it's like, it's insane. I mean, it's like 18 pages of like hard science. It's very, very easy to read. You don't have to be a propeller head to understand what he's saying, but he's giving away amazing information. Again, it's appliedmetabolics.com. Go over to the right-hand side of his website and sign up for his newsletter. It's worth every penny.
Jerry, how many papers do you read to digest for every newsletter issue?
Okay, first, I just want to make one correction.
Okay. Go ahead.
18 pages is one article. It's only one article.
Yeah, I know. Believe
somewhere
me.
like 40, 56.
No, but well, that's the thing. I mean, I usually have like what I call a major feature, and then I have like what I call a moderate one, and then I have like a smaller one, might be a book review or something like that. But the thing is, for the major features, it takes me as much as like 9 days just to read the medical papers, because I'll read anywhere from 50 to 100 papers for one article. Believe it or not.
You're doing people's homework.
So real quick then, Jerry, like Nelson said, I want to just keep going. You're a machine right now. I want to keep going. So So we have these questions here. I'm just going to combine kind of two questions here, and I'm going to let you just kind of pontificate. But
Okay.
so in regard to actual supplements that quote unquote work, now we already know that it's still a minimal effect at best. But for the ones that work, like the ECA stack, right? Yohambine HCl for stubborn body fat, or A2 receptors. There's L-tyrosine. I want you to elaborate a little bit about those, and then also, and I think you kind of already hit on it. Discuss, like, for everybody who's watching today, and I think this is probably the crucial question. What do you need to do from a dietary perspective, from a caloric deficit, from the, as Nelson said, the type of macronutrients? Like, where does someone need to be in combination with supplements to get maximum fat loss?
Okay. All right. First of all, let's start. You mentioned the ECA stack.
Yeah.
Caffeine, that stands for ephedrine, caffeine, aspirin. I'll just do a brief overview, because I obviously can talk about this for 9 hours, each one of them. I'm not exaggerating. Anyway, anyone who's seen my videos knows, that.
And by the way, they can find a lot of your videos on YouTube if you just type, your name.
I've been doing like one video a month. It's usually about an hour long, but I'm going to start coming out with short ones, like maybe only 5-6 minutes, because what is it, the TED seminars, they found that people's attention span is only 17 minutes. I'm thinking, wait a minute, am I losing half my viewers after the first third of the show? And then that's, by the way, real quickly, this is a problem I've had with the newsletter. I mean, I got to tell you guys, I mean, I shouldn't say this, but I'll tell you, I've had a number of dropouts. And what happens is that these people subscribe, and they're expecting, like, these, when they hear newsletter, they think it's going to be one of these 3-page things that they can read in 5 minutes.
Right.
Suddenly they get this thing that's like 40-50 pages long, and a lot of them just don't say they love my stuff, but they don't have time to read it. But see, I'm writing this newsletter, believe it or not, for guys like you, Jay, you, Nelson. I'm writing for guys that want to know in-depth information, want to know science-based evidence. If you have a short attention span, it's probably not for you. I mean, you're better off just looking at some of these websites that you could read in 30 seconds or something, or watch one of these videos, or what can I say? I'm trying to give people in-depth information. But to answer your question, the ECA stack, it's an interesting brief history. There was a doctor in Denmark in a little town called Elsinore. He was treating asthmatic patients. He got this idea to give them ephedrine, which is a natural bronchodilator, and he also added caffeine, which of course it has a substance in it called theophylline, which actually for a long time was the standard oral drug to treat asthma. And he gave his patients this combination of ephedrine and caffeine. I can't help laughing. They all started losing body fat, right? And he said, wait a minute, what the hell's going on here? To make a long story short, it turns out that ephedrine, they found out that they did some studies, or they did some tests over the years. They found a combination of ephedrine, caffeine, and aspirin was very good, and ephedrine worked in a number of ways. For one thing, it had a potent thermogenic effect. Thermogenic refers to turning calories into heat, a futile energy cycle. Instead of like the calories being stored as fat, they're literally burned up, turned into air. They're gone. They're oxidized. That's thermogenesis, right? Second of all, ephedrine also it stimulated what they call it stimulated the beta-2 receptors. The beta-2 adrenic receptors are receptors on your fat cells or lipocytes that actually liberate triglycerides or stored fat. So it is involved in that. The way it did that is it stimulated catecholamines, epinephrine, and norepinephrine. That's another mechanism it had. And still another mechanism is that it stimulated the conversion of the inactive thyroid hormone known as T4 into the active thyroid hormone, which is T3, and that went on and on. That never abated. There was no what they call prophylaxis. In other words, it kept your metabolism going. So if we could sum it all up, you're wondering why the aspirin. Okay, the aspirin worked because it inhibited this enzyme called phosphodiesterase. You might know, Nelson, I know that you're big on this. It might sound familiar. You know that phosphodiesterase, a different form, is involved in how Viagra works with cyclic GMP, right? Anyway, to make I don't want to get into too much biochemistry, but by inhibiting phosphodiesterase, the aspirin allowed a greater buildup of what they call cyclic AMP, which in turn stimulated hormone-sensitive lipase, which is also involved in the liberation of fat. Later on, they said to themselves, well, we don't need the aspirin. It turns out all we need is the caffeine and the ephedrine, because the aspirin, it really doesn't do that much. Guess what? And just recently, only about a couple of months ago, they found a brand new property of aspirin, brand new. This was not known for years. I mean, in fact, they didn't even know how aspirin worked for the first 100 years it existed. Nobody knew how aspirin worked, right? But they found a brand new property. What it does, are you guys familiar with a substance called AMPK?
Sure, sure.
AMPK, aspirin, Jay, get this, aspirin stimulates AMPK.
Wow.
You know that AMPK controls fat oxidation in muscle.
Yep.
So it turns out that the aspirin had a good reason for being in the ECA stat. Now, I'll just end it, by, I don't want to keep going about ECA, but I will tell you, I have a kind of personal stake in this, because as you know, the the ephedrine was removed from sale by the FDA.
Right.
I believe it was 2004, because of reports of strokes and heart attacks and all this stuff, right? And the truth of the matter is, they found out that 98% of these reported medical incidents were not actually caused by the ephedrine. There was really nothing wrong with ephedrine. It was used by thousands. I actually testified in court in a case involving a guy who supposedly had a stroke from using an ephedrine supplement. Under oath, I was asked by a lawyer, Mr. Brainham, you're the science editor of Muscle and Fitness. Isn't it true that ephedrine causes strokes and heart attacks? I said, absolutely not. Awesome. And he protested, and Your Honor, blah, 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 blah. I kept on, well, it's a long story, but the point is that, thousands of people use it. It was safe. Of course, anything, there's an old saying, only the dose determines the poison. Right. Of course, if you take an overdose of ephedrine, it can raise your blood pressure too high. If you have already have high blood pressure, then you could be in a little dangerous situation.
It can create tachycardia if you abuse it, for sure.
Absolutely, yeah, because, it's anything that stimulates the catecholamines, norepinephrine is going to speed your heart. That's the way beta blocker drugs work. They block the catecholamines. So, of course, there's going to be a tachycardia, as you just pointed out. So, ECA was saying, why was it removed? It was removed because it actually worked.
Right, no shit.
It actually worked.
Right.
And it competed with the existing weight loss drugs sold that the pharmaceutical companies spent billions on to develop and still do. So the FDA stepped in because the charter of the FDA decrees that the main reason for their existence, a lot of people don't know this, is to protect and foster pharmaceutical companies. So the FDA made up all this bogus stuff about heart attacks, removed, it's amazing, but there's been books written about it. This is not coming from me. There's been books written. Okay, and then the next thing you asked about was it Yohimbe?
Yohimbe and HCl and L-tyrosine. Yep.
Okay, Yohimbe HCl is a very interesting stuff. As you point out, it's an alpha-adrenic A2 blocker. Now, what is alpha-adrenic? Now, the real briefly, without going into a lot of physiology, the most of your fat cells, the type they have what they call adrenic receptors, and these are the receptors that interact with the catecholamines, epinephrine and norepinephrine. When they kind of react with, when they kind of lock onto these beta receptors, most of them are beta 2 receptors on the fat cells. When they lock onto these beta 2, it's a little bit more complex. I'm obviously leaving out a lot of enzymatic steps for simplification purposes. But when they kind of react with these beta 2 receptors on fat cells, the fat cells release fat.
Right.
Fat is mobilized. It's mobilized. It's sent out as it's broken down by hormone-sensitive lipase into free fatty acids and glycerol. This is what hits the blood, right? In fact, they measure the fat in the blood through glycerol and how much glycerol enters the blood. Now, here's where the now, if the beta 2 alpha-adrenic receptors release fat, it turns out that the alpha-2 receptors do the opposite. They retain fat. Alpha-2 adrenic receptors are the reason why most women have trouble. You know this is true, Jay. Most women have trouble losing lower body fat, their hips, their butt, their upper thigh. Exactly, because they have a preponderance of alpha-2 adrenic receptors, which literally locks the fat into the fat cells for a good reason, though. That fat is called sex-specific fat. It's there to ensure that no less than the perpetuation of the human species.
Childbearing, exactly.
Exactly, because it takes 80,000 calories to produce a human fetus, and the body says, we're going to make sure we have that fuel. Screw you, lady, and your big behind. We're going to still have that fat.
Jerry, that's a really good point, and that's why a lot of female fitness competitors, bodybuilders, fit physique chicks, they have serious problems metabolically after they lose those body fat stores and they go beyond that, like you said, that set point for maternal reasons, because after that they have the issues now because, wow, their body doesn't know what the hell's going on, right?
Yeah, they stop menstruating for once.
Right.
Yeah, well, yeah. If the body fat goes down, obviously, if it goes below 11% fat, there's a signal sent where the body, a female body, interprets that as a starvation situation, and and it won't let her get pregnant because blah blah, the energy deficit and all that. No, but relating to the you'll say, well, okay, so now we've established that you have these alpha-2 adrenic receptors mainly in the preponderance of the lower body. By the way, men can have it too.
In their belly.
Yeah, you see, I know a couple of guys in the gym that complain to me how when they're training for a contest, their upper body, they diet, they exercise, their upper bodies get shredded, but their legs just don't respond. I mean, they have size, but they can't get the cross cuts, the vascular, the shredding. And I suspect that these guys have two problems. One of them is that through genetics, they have a little bit higher normal number of the alpha-adrenic 2 receptors. And second of all, I don't know what kind of drug program they might, and Nelson, you know this is true too, they might be producing too much estrogen, because estrogen also stimulates, in fact, it maintains the alpha-2 adrenic receptors, right? Now, here's where yohimbine comes in. Yohimbine actually is a natural alpha adrenal A2, well, let's call it A2 for simplicity, an A2 blocker, right? And the proper dose is this is important, 0.2 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. Now, for a 200-pound man, that comes out to about 22 milligrams. Why am I emphasizing this? I am emphasizing this because there's a case study of a bodybuilder who actually took 5,000 milligrams of yohimbine. The guy wound up in the hospital with severe tachycardia and neurological damage, right? And because the main sign of toxicity with yohimbine is you get almost like a panic attack. I spoke to an MMA competitor a couple of years ago who wanted to use yohimbine to lose body fat, and he wound up in the hospital. He said, Jerry, I thought I was losing my mind. I said, what do you mean? Because the anxiety was off the board. He says, I just couldn't think straight. So he didn't use a lot, by the way. He just had a sensitivity to it, right? Now, if you're going to use yohimbine, it has to be on an empty stomach, right? You cannot. If you have any kind of insulin release, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't do anything at all, right? If you have coffee, it has to be black coffee, no sweetener, nothing, right? You take it on an empty stomach. You take it about an hour before you work out, and it will actually allow you to tap in. And Jay, just for your own information, it's an interesting fact. The only other time, without taking yohimbine, the only time a female can directly tap into those lower body fat stores, this is interesting, is when she's lactating. When she's lactating, it actually opens up those lower body fat stores because those calories are used to power the lactation process, which is highly caloric dependent, right? Wow. So, women who breastfeed, you might hear this, women who breastfeed tend to get their figures back. Right. Women gain an average of 24 pounds when they're pregnant, right? That's normal. And then, they get a little fat on them, because of the hormone changes, right? But women who actually breastfeed get their figures back much faster, and this is the reason why, because it goes in reverse now. The body starts to take the stored calories and use them for the breast milk production, all that stuff.
Wow.
That's awesome. Jerry, Jerry, I'm sorry, I lost internet access for like 5 minutes. So, did we talk about the cardiovascular side effects of ephedrine and yohimbine? And also the effects on sleep. I mean, if you take them in the afternoon, it may actually impair your sleep, and that's counterproductive for fat loss. As we know, you need to sleep well, right, to lose fat.
That's very true. Now, of course, as I said earlier with Jay, the truth of the matter is that when you're dealing with adrenic substances, adrenal chemicals like epinephrine, norepinephrine, which is involved in both yohimbe and ephedrine, you're going to get some heart stimulation. As I mentioned to Jay, the class of drugs called beta blockers, which are very often given to people with heart disease, they work simply by blocking the catecholamines, norepinephrine, because these things hit the heart. They tend to overstimulate. The beta receptors in the heart are not the same ones that are in the fat cells. They're called beta-1 receptors. Those are what's preponderant in the heart. In the fat cells, it's beta-2 receptors, right? The problem is when you take a supplement like ephedrine, for example, it's not selective. That's the problem. It's not selective for beta-2. If it was selective for beta-2, there would be very little heart overlap, right? But because there's an overlap, it affects the beta-1 and the beta-3 receptors. What are beta-3 receptors? They're the receptors that are on brown adipose tissue, which I could talk about in a second. It relates to what you asked me earlier, Nelson and Jay, about future methods of fat loss, which will really work in the future. A lot of it revolves around brown adipose tissue, all fat. But the point I'm trying to make is that you get the cardiovascular effects because of the overlap, because ephedrine, especially when taken an overdose, like as I said to Jay earlier, if you overdose on ephedrine, you're going to start to stimulate the beta-1 receptors. You're going to get a lot of heart stimulation. It can cause problems. And same with the yohimbe. Yohimbe can also, stimulate the catecholamines. Again, taken in excess, it can cause some excess cardiac stimulation. So the key point I'm trying to make here is most of this stuff is safe when it's taking in the suggested amounts. Like I said, 0.2 milligram per kilogram of yohimbe. As far as as far as ephedrine goes, I would suggest no more than 20 to 25 milligrams. That's it. Don't take any more than that. I've known guys that have taken as much as 50, 60 milligrams of ephedrine, and nothing happened to them. But they did admit that they can feel their heart speeding up. It's a little dangerous to do that because you might have what they call occult heart disease. You might have, for example, atrial fibrillation, something wrong with your heart. If you take one of these things in an overdose, you can push yourself over the edge, and you can have some serious medical complications.
So Jerry, one thing I want, Nelson, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. One thing I wanted to add, and Nelson and I talked about this yesterday. I used Twin Labs Rip Fuel as the tons of guys probably in the 90s. My issue with using ephedra or ephedrine is I'm one of those guys that's really sensitive to it, and I get this smooth muscle stimulation along my prostate walls, and so I get the drip. So right. I can't use ephedrine anymore. Is there any way can you elaborate a little bit about on that? Like, what do you think the population? Who from a man's standpoint, like how high do you think the population base of people that have that sensitivity to ephedrine, the prostate stimulation?
I don't think that's ever been actually studied. I've never seen a study. It's hard to say it is a definite side effect. In fact, you might recall when ephedrine was sold, it had a list of contraindications on the label. Yep. One of them was cardiovascular disease. Another one was prostate disease. Yep. Because it does overly affect the smooth muscle, as exactly like you just pointed out. So I would say it's probably some sort of, again, a genetic predisposition. Not everybody can take ephedrine. And of course, there's always alternatives to it. So, there was nothing missing. And, I'll quickly add, related, again, this, you have to excuse me. My mind goes so fast. It's like a ping pong ball. I'm bouncing.
It's okay. It's okay.
That's a sign of genius. That's a sign of genius.
But I just wanted to mention real fast. They just came out with a recent study, which is very discouraging to people like me that love ephedrine. What they found with long-term use of ephedrine. Let's say you actually could get it if you wanted to, even though it's banned in the United States. You can actually buy it on the internet. Yep. But here's why you might not want to use it long-term. Long-term use of ephedrine actually blocks brown adipose tissue formation. That is not good, not good. So in other words, even though it supplies its own thermogenic effect, in the long run, it's not really, in other words, if you're going to use ephedrine, use it intermittently, don't take it all the time. That's the bottom.
Right.
Jerry, another question. Let's talk about the difference between subcutaneous fat, the fat we have under the skin,
okay,
and working out actually makes some people ripped. But
right.
the difference between that and visceral, the
very good question.
fat inside the gut issue, because I think you and I have gone back and forth on the bodybuilder belly. They're all ripped, but they have all this belly coming out, and you're not having discussions on the fact that I think it's visceral fat, even though subcutaneous fat is very low. That's why they're ripped. Inside, they're accumulating fat, and we have that in my world. In HIV, we have visceral fat accumulation due to the disease itself. So for me, and visceral fat, it really is metabolically the most damaging fat. Subcutaneous fat is actually keeping us warm. There's no metabolic issues there. So yeah, let's go ahead.
Okay.
Real quick, just so you guys know, the people that are watching, up in the right corner, there's a little Q&A box. You hit that. If you want to ask a question, we got about 10 to 15 minutes left. That Jerry will be here, so jump in and ask.
We may go over.
I can stay over if you need.
We'll go over real quick. There's a lot of people I know that are going to ask the question of like, hey, can you guys outline Jerry's preferred protocol, like how to use the ECA stack, how to use your hobby? I know he just gave dosages, but we'll get those in the Q&A after 5. So continue, Jerry.
Okay, answering Nelson's question, the various fat depots in the body is a fascinating subject that is very, very often misinterpreted and misunderstood by people, to the extent that it's actually one of my scheduled articles for my Applied Metabolics newsletter. Without going into really super technical detail, I'm going to explain the different effects or properties of these various fat depots. But to give an overview to answer your question, Nelson, the subcutaneous fat, even though you're right, this is the fat that's just under the skin. This is the fat that bodybuilders hate, because this is the thing that makes you look smooth. Subcutaneous fat is the reason why women have smoother skin than men, because estrogen stimulates subcutaneous fat, which, Nelson, as you know, that's one of the side effects of estrogen, is it can stimulate subcutaneous fat formation. Now, it sounds bad, but guess what? It turns out that subcutaneous fat, from a health, not from an aesthetic viewpoint, from a health viewpoint, is actually very good, because it acts as a storage depot for fat. In other words, if it's in the subcutaneous fat, it's not going to be in other areas where it can cause problems. When the subcutaneous fat gets too filled, in other words, when it's like maximized, then you have what they call ectopic fat stores. These are the fat, this is where the fat is stored in places that it's very, very dangerous. One such place is the liver. Fatty liver right now is what they call non-alcoholic fatty liver. It's in epidemic proportions. They estimate that as many as 70 million people are walking around with it. It's a precursor to diabetes, insulin insensitivity, and heart disease, right? There's not supposed to be a lot of fat in the liver. The second part where fat can cause a problem, and this is very interesting, is in the muscle, intramuscular triglyceride. But they have to put an asterisk next to that. In an average person who doesn't work out, intramuscular triglyceride is very, very closely associated, especially certain forms like ceramide and diglycerols. These things are associated with increased insulin resistance and diabetes. But guess what? When you work out, Jay, when you're active, something happens where you actually use intramuscular triglyceride as an energy source during training. In fact, 50% of the fat that you use, that you oxidize when you work out, comes from intramuscular triglyceride, the fat stored in muscle. So the fat in stored muscle is completely different in active people versus inactive or sedentary people. Now, as far as visceral fat goes, that is perhaps, and Nelson, I think you know this, it is the most dangerous from a health aspect, the most dangerous toxic fat of all. And here's the reason why. Visceral fat, for those who don't know, this is the deep-lying abdominal fat. You can't see it. The stuff on top, let's talk about abdominals. The abdominal fat that obscures, let's say, your pubes, your abdominals, that's subcutaneous fat. Now, the good news, listen to everyone listening to this, that fat, the subcutaneous fat on top of your abdominals, that's the very first fat that's burned in the body when you work out. There's no such thing as spot reducing, but that particular fat happens to be the very first type of fat that's tapped into when you work out or go on a diet, right? Now, the visceral fat is the deep-lying fat that lines the internal organs, right? Now the problem with the visceral fat is that it's very labile, meaning that it's constantly being broken down, and what happens is it's broken down and it's put in a special little blood system called the portal system. It travels to the liver, and the liver, it builds up that triglyceride, that fat in the liver, and again, it's related. Because of that, it's related to, again, insulin resistance, heart disease, diabetes, and I think it's a 300% increased rate of possible cancer. So the visceral fat, and again, Nelson and I have talked about this, the bloated belly. Look, I did a video on that. I mean, I don't think it's clearly established. I think, Nelson, your theory is that it is a localized visceral fat. Am I correct?
Yeah, I think anabolic steroids and growth hormone, and growth hormone has an effect on visceral fat, but yeah, anabolics actually can decrease subcutaneous and increase visceral. There's actually some papers on that. So, but hey, you know, we can go back and forth on that. We don't have to get into details today. Did we? Have we gotten? I'm sorry, as I said, I missed it for 5 minutes. Gotten into the diet part of, or the macronutrient part of the discussion?
That was the one thing when you losing out, he was going to answer that. I asked that. That was the second part of the question. So Jerry, just jump to that. And then we're going to go down, like, in the Q&A session at 5. We'll go into like optimal strategies, Jerry. But just go into, so when someone's using all these great fat burners that you're talking about, talk about what is the optimal diet. Okay, so what is the optimal caloric deficit, and then what do you believe is the optimal macronutrient percentages?
Okay, as far as, that's a difficult question to answer because you have to take into account individual differences in metabolism.
Right.
Let's just pull one out a year just to kind of illustrate what I'm talking about. Low carbohydrate diets, right? I mean, it's a controversial subject. Nelson knows. I think you guys are subscribed. I've written about in my newsletter about the some of the nuances of the low carbohydrate ketogenic diets. And as I pointed out in my article, it's not for everybody. Who's it for? It's for people that are insulin resistant.
Right.
If you have any problem with insulin resistance, and I use a good example, the very simple way to know if you're insulin resistant, if you consume a meal high in carbohydrates, and within an hour you feel kind of sleepy and tired, the odds are good that you're insulin resistant. That's one way of figuring it out. The other way is simply by levels of body fat. If you have a high level of body fat, let's say over 50% is considered normal, and then let's say if you're in the 20% or higher range, there's a very good chance that you're insulin resistant. In that situation, you actually are better off with a low carb diet. I mean, you might have heard about that study they just came out with the other day where they compared low carbohydrate diet. I have an article in the next issue of my newsletter about that, where they compared low carbohydrate diet to low fat diet in a metabolic ward for 6 days, and the low fat diet turned out to burn more fat than the low carb diet. It was a kind of a bogus study for a number of reasons. For one, it wasn't really a truly low carbohydrate diet. The carbohydrate diet they used was a moderate carbohydrate diet, and they compared it to an extreme low fat diet of 7.7% fat. Nobody eats a diet 7.7. Not even vegetarians who eat no fat, even they eat more than 7% fat. Right. And the study authors themselves admitted this diet would never be used in the real world. So it's kind of a pointless. The main point of the study was to show that you can lose. I think it was that you can lose body fat. It revolved around this insulin controversy. This like you guys heard of Gary Taubes, the writer? Well, he basically blames everything on insulin. He says people get fat because of insulin. What stimulates insulin? Carbohydrates, especially simple carbohydrates. Again, he's a very intelligent guy. I admire him as a writer, but he overlooks a lot of biochemistry. For example, some amino acids are as potent as sugar, like leucine stimulates the same degree of insulin release as eating white bread. So it's not just insulin. It's a little bit more complicated, but you can't escape the fact that when insulin is secreted, fat in the body is either being stored or synthesized. Right. In other words, if you do something to increase insulin when you're working out, for example, your fat oxidation drops to below resting levels. In other words, you actually burn more fat doing nothing than if you take something that's going to raise your insulin levels during it. This is why drinking, let's say, high carbohydrate drinks when you work out That's not a good idea if you're looking to lose body fat.
Yeah.
It's kind of dumb. In fact, the only people that should be drinking, let's say, sports drinks or carbohydrate drinks when they work out are people who are doing extended workouts for over 2 hours. A 1 hour
Endurance, right.
Or runners.
Ultra endurance.
Yeah, you need nothing more than water when you work out. That's the truth. Because weight workouts are based on, as you guys know, on the amount of glycogen stored in the muscles, and the amount of glycogen depends on not what you ate an hour before, but what you ate in the 24 to 48 hours prior to the workout. A lot of people overlook that fact. Now, to get back to your question, as far as the composition of diet, it has to be determined by the response. You have to kind of check, be objective and look at the way you respond to carbohydrates and fats. Some people, for example, have a higher tolerance for carbohydrates. Those people they can eat carbohydrates. They should, at all costs, avoid refined carbohydrates, though. Forget about fruit juice, and forget about, the sugar stuff. You want to get your carbohydrates from some vegetable, a lot of vegetables, moderate amount of fruit, right? And of course, you want to keep your protein up, and you can keep in that situation, you can keep your fat lower. But if you're working out, this is an important point. If you're working out, never, never, never let the macronutrient content of your diet drop below 25%. If you're a man, you're going to short circuit your testosterone synthesis. You have to have 25% of your diet as fat calories to maintain testosterone out.
Good
So
point.
that's an important point. If you do opt to go, see, a lot of people go extreme. I'm going on a low-fat diet. I'm cutting all fat out. If you work out, that's a big mistake. This is one of the reasons, by the way, a lot of people wonder why do vegans have so much trouble building muscle? Believe it or not, they get enough protein. And if they do it right, they get enough nutrients. The main problem is twofold. First of all, they're not getting creatine unless they take a creatine supplement. Second of all, is a lot of these guys, men and women, they're eating almost no fat.
Low testosterone.
And a lot of soy.
If they overdo the soy, that's another thing. If you overdo the soy, you're also short-circuiting your testosterone. So, again, it depends on the government percentage of macronutrients, which they recommend, which I believe is 55% carbohydrate. I think it's 15% protein, and with the rest of it is, I can't remember the fat amount. Maybe you know, Jay, I don't remember it offhand.
It's good that you don't remember because it's all crap anyway. It's a pyramid.
Yeah,
So
that's what I was just going to say. In other words, the reason I don't remember it probably is because it's ludicrous.
Right.
It's not really based on any science. The old food pyramid where they had all these that was all bullshit. It was all nonsense. Nobody should follow those recommendations. Nobody. What I strongly suggest is to experiment with different foods and see how you react to different carbohydrates. There's certain taboo foods that should not be in any diet. Refined carbohydrates, not necessarily. There's a difference, by the way, between refined carbohydrates and high glycemic. High glycemic carbohydrates high glycemic simply means that they're absorbed a little faster, right? High glycemic carbohydrates do have a place. If you take them after a workout, they'll stimulate glycogen a little bit faster than normal. As long as you take them at the right time, they're okay. But refined carbohydrates, and by the way, high glycemic, that would be like certain fruits. I'm not talking about sugars and candy. That's crap. That belongs in no diet at all. The other thing you want to watch out for, high fructose corn syrup, which is ubiquitous. You can have, this is a lot of people don't understand this. You can have as much as 100 grams a day of fructose. Nothing happens. Nothing happens. It's just like sugar. It's sugar. Nothing happens. If you go over 100 grams, you start to get that triglyceride build up in the liver, and along with that comes insulin resistance, diabetes, and heart disease. You say, well, what is the point there? The point is high fructose corn syrup is ubiquitous. Go in the store and look at the processed foods, all those TV dinners, everything, ketchup, they're all loaded with fructose corn syrup. So believe it or not, if you eat these processed foods, there's a very good likelihood you will actually go over 100 grams of fructose, and you will have metabolic problems. High fructose corn syrup actually inhibits fat oxidation in large. It makes you fatter in about 10 different ways. I don't have time to go into it, but it's very, very bad for you. That's the other thing to always avoid, and it's not as much a problem now as it was years ago. You guys are familiar with trans fats, hydrogenated fats?
Sure.
There's a little bit of a trick they're doing with food processing. they allow foods like, for example, commercial peanut butter. On the label, it says 0 trans fats. But if you look at the label ingredients, what does it say? Hydrogenated vegetable. Now, wait a minute. You scratch your head. Partially hydrogenated vegetable. That's trans fats. How could they say 0 trans fat? Here's how they get away with it. They're going by the portion size. In other words, half a teaspoon of peanut butter has has half a gram of trans fats. If a food has half a gram of trans fat or less, you could put 0 trans fat. Now, Jay Nelson, how many people do you know eat half a teaspoon of peanut butter?
Not me. So get the natural, peanut butter and almond butter from the store, the one that you grind in the grinders.
Hey, real quick, Scott, is there any questions? Do we have any questions on the side?
Yeah, so there's a couple questions from James. One was, if you're allergic to aspirin, is there any supplement that can be used instead that would be just as efficacious in the ECA stack?
That's a good question. A lot of people would answer the question by saying white willow bark, which is that's basically the natural source of salicylates. Aspirin, the chemical name for aspirin is acetylsalicylic acid, right? Natural salicylates are found in white willow bark. But you see, the problem is that if you're allergic to aspirin,
same thing.
It's the same thing. So, unfortunately, it would have to be something. I'll tell you, strangely enough, you might want to substitute. If you use the ECA stack and you're allergic to aspirin, believe it or not, I would throw in green tea.
Right.
Green tea also inhibits phosphodiesterase. That's the enzyme you're looking to inhibit. That's the one that knocks out cyclic AMP and blocks the hormone-sensitive lipase. So if you put in a moderate amount of, that should work instead of the aspirin, right? And it also would provide a thermogenic. So green tea would be a perfect substitute. And I just want to quickly add, do not go crazy on green tea. Do not go crazy on green tea. The capsule form, the supplement form of green tea is much more concentrated than the actual green tea beverage. And some people, they're showing up, some people have a lack of enzyme where what happens in their body doesn't break down green tea as rapidly. It tends to build up, and in the liver, it has a pro-oxidant effect. It starts to destroy liver cells. A couple of people had to have liver transplant. You guys might have heard about, they pulled the supplement, a popular fat burner called Hydroxycut. Do you remember Hydroxycut?
Right. Yeah, of course. Muscle Tech. Yep.
Yeah, Hydroxycut was removed by the FDA in 2007. The company that made it suffered tremendous loss. They actually, believe it or not, this is how it has a wave-like effect, right? The removal of Hydroxycut from the market caused the company that makes Hydroxycut to pull about 70% of their ads from bodybuilding magazines. This is what started the decline of bodybuilding magazines that still exist to this day. It was all because of Hydroxycut. Now, what was in Hydroxycut that caused liver problems? Nobody really knows. A lot of people suspect it was the green tea content. The problem is that the amount of green tea in Hydroxycut was not excessive. It was not excessive. Since there was not thousands and thousands of people took Hydroxycut, millions probably, with no problems. I suspect that the people that had problems with it are the same people that have problems with green tea. They have a genetic susceptibility to toxicity, just like you have with ephedrine, Jay. In other words, that's it. That's the bottom line.
So Scott, what's the other question?
The other question is, what are your thoughts on intermittent fasting for overall health and to decrease body fat?
That's a good question.
Is that for me?
Yeah, it's for you, bro.
For you.
Okay. Intermittent fasting, which happens to be, I think that good. Right now, I'm debating my next article. I'm going to start my newsletter tomorrow for the October issue. I'm kind of like vacillating between 3 or 4 different subjects. One of the leading subjects right now is intermittent fasting, coincidentally.
Awesome.
A big article on it, right? I think intermittent fasting is, if you can handle it, is very, very good.
Definitely.
From a health standpoint, it's the only word I can think of is it's fabulous. Seriously.
And what is the definition? What is the definition of intermittent?
Right, the definition of intermittent fasting basically is to go a certain amount of hours without eating, and on certain days, you could do it. There's actually 4 or 5 different methods. One method is, for example, to eat, let's say, certain meals at certain times, and then have for maybe 8 hours don't eat anything. That's one way of doing it. Another way is to eat very little, like cut your calories by as much as maybe 40% or maybe 30% one day, and the next day eat normally. But, so there's basically about 4 different ways to do, which I'm going to outline in the article. Some ways are easier than others. It depends on how there is a certain amount of hunger involved, depending on which method you use. Some are more tolerable than others. You kind of have to experiment to see which form of intermittent fasting, but it does a number of things. It increases brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is this chemical in the brain, which actually helps to preserve and maintain neurons.
Right.
If you have a large amount of this in the brain, it could possibly, repair the initial damage that occurs with Alzheimer's disease. I mean, it's tremendous stuff. That's just one thing it does. But it also, believe it or not, it keeps your muscles younger.
Yeah.
In other words, when you do intermittent fasting, it tones down certain genes in muscles that are related to muscle aging, and also it seems to help preserve mitochondria, which are the powerhouses of the cell. This is where fat is oxidized and ATP as energy is produced. This is also where DNP works. One of the theories of aging is a gradual loss of mitochondria.
Right.
When you lose mitochondria, you're basically losing the energy source of the cell, and the cell dies, right? Now, in muscles are especially sensitive to mitochondria, obviously because of the great amount of energy used by muscles. Muscles are the most energetic tissue in the body. So the thing is, if you can maintain mitochondria in muscle, right, it turns out that you will keep your muscles younger much, much longer. You know what I'm saying? Now, I'm not saying they're going to be bigger. Where the size stuff comes in, that's more related to, and Nelson would also agree, that's related to hormonal factors, for growth hormone, your testosterone levels, that kind of stuff, but to actually keep the muscles healthy, let's say, you want to maintain mitochondria. The ways to do that are exercise and certain kinds of diet. Intermittent fasting is an excellent way to keep your mitochondria basically young. And I can go.
If I could just add something real quick, Scott, are you okay to go a couple more minutes?
Yeah, I mean, I got to be somewhere, but I got about 10 minutes.
Okay, well, I was just say just 5 minutes. Monica and I practice intermittent fasting, Nelson, now. We train on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. We do our intermittent fasting on the days we want to keep our insulin suppressed, our insulin signal suppressed, Jerry. So Tuesdays and Thursdays we do it, and we do it in a way where we stop, like the last meal is eaten at 8 o'clock at night, and then I don't eat until 2 o'clock the next day. Monica can't go as long. There's obviously reasons why women can't fast as long as men. It's evolutionary. But I find intermittent fasting to be amazing, because on the days that you do the intermittent fasting, on the next day you can actually eat a little bit more calorically and get away with it, because your body is becoming so efficient at the days that you starve. And as Jerry says, there's a lot of biochemical processes going on during your fasting windows, the increase in catecholamines. And then also I find, Jerry, and maybe you can comment to this, but when you get really used to intermittent fasting, your body almost gets really close to ketosis. I don't think you cross the barrier, but you get really, really close, and your brain does adapt and shifts to running on body fat as your primary fuel source, and you definitely become more, your cognition increases, in my opinion.
Well, you see, the thing is, when you're doing intermittent fasting, you're greatly increasing a process. You might have heard this expression, metabolic flexibility.
Right.
What it refers to is the ability to tap into carbohydrate or fat as needed very quickly and very efficiently. And, when you do the intermittent fasting, you condition your body in such a manner that you can use carbohydrates much more efficiently, where it tends to not wind up as body fat stores. And also, as needed, you can also tap into your fat stores. And you're probably right, there maybe is a little bit of a low-level ketosis going on there in the latter stages, towards like those kind of final hours there. You're probably getting a little bit of, which, and as you know, ketones they now know, believe it or not, is very potent brain fuel.
Sure.
In fact, all the textbooks talk about how the preferred source of fuel for the brain is glucose, but they now know that the brain actually works better on ketones.
Right.
So there you go. So, so it's a true effect.
I do have to warn though, there are some people with medical conditions or they're taking medications that require food. So, and if you have diabetes, obviously you have to eat. So this is not for everybody. Do we have another question? We're actually running out of time. We can actually also you can ask questions on the YouTube. We're going to post this recorded session on YouTube for everybody to watch forever. And Jay, talk about your website too, so that people can ask you questions.
So guys, so real quick, I'm going to actually have the replay of this video up on my site, which is FABFit over40. Most of you guys know it's fabfitover40.com. Feel free to leave comments underneath. I think this hangout's been epic. Jerry's, we only broached the subject of a lot of really, really good stuff. The entire time I've been literally taking notes. Jerry, it's insane. I thought I knew, pretty much a lot of stuff, but Jerry surprises me. So there was great information on this. That's about it. I don't really have anything else to say, but I will put this. I know, Nelson, you're going to run this on all your sites, but I'll have this on the blog this evening.
Yeah, I'm going to get it transcribed. So for people that don't or can't watch a video for an hour and 25 minutes, they'll be able to read it. Some people from work, actually, when they're taking a break.
Well, let me actually do the transcription. I already got a guy do it. So
okay, good. And my website is excelmail.com, and I'll be posting it there too. But another website, we didn't talk about it today because it's basically when you're doing all this stuff, taking supplements or the diet, it'll also be good to talk to your doctor, obviously, although some doctors may not know much about supplements, and to get some blood tests done. Even a regular CBC and CMP. I have a company called DiscountedLabs.com that provides basically the cheapest lab test online, and we provide actually a prescription. You don't need to see a doctor. But as I said, for liability purposes, it's also good to bring your doctor into the discussion. Some doctors are very open-minded. So, but as I said, as you have heard, and I think you agree with me, everybody that has seen this Google Hangout, Jerry is a science guy. Jerry doesn't say anything that he hasn't read at least 3 or 4 papers, and not only papers on humans, not only on rodents or rats. Right. So that's why we had him today. I can predict that this is not going to be the last hangout with him, because he can talk about 100 other topics with this kind of depth. I really admire Jerry, and if you really, and I'm talking to the audience right now, if you really care about getting deep education, not only a shallow bro science type of information, and a lot of people just want 40 characters or less information. Register to his applymetabolics.com newsletter, because you'll learn more than going to any class out there, and he's ahead of the game anyway. So that's all I have to say.
Awesome, Jerry. Thank you so much for coming on. Scott, you have the final word.
You guys have the final word. I was just sitting here blown away, man. I'm sorry I didn't have a lot of questions. It was unbelievable just listening to everything that Jerry had to say. So thank you so much, Jerry, for being on with these guys. And Nelson, Jay, why don't you take it away? Are we going to be doing another one of these next month?
Yes, we are.
Go ahead, Nelson. We're gonna actually discuss Defy Medical and talk to some of the great doctors at Defy Medical. We're gonna talk about telemedicine, like how essentially people can be in any part of the United States, almost all the states. There's a couple states they're restricted, but they can work with doctors remotely for telemedicine for both HRT, nutraceuticals, and all kinds of other stuff. And so Nelson and I are going to have those guys on, and we're looking forward to that show.
Awesome. Well,
thank you very much, everybody. And as I said, this will be available for everybody else. And tell your friends about these Hangouts too. We have a Facebook group, so just Google us or find us on the internet on YouTube or FatFit over50, applymetabolics.com or excelmail.com. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for coming on, guys. We really